Today's scripture is a reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 32, verses 7 to 14. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry up and go down. Your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, are ruining everything. They've already abandoned the path that I commanded. They've made a metal bull calf for themselves. They bowed down to it and offered sacrifices to it and declared, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord told Moses, "I've been watching these people, and I've seen how stubborn they are. Now leave me alone. Let my fire burn and devour them. Then I'll make a great nation out of you." But Moses pleaded with the Lord, "Lord, why does your fury burn against your own people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and amazing force? Why should the Egyptians say, 'He had an evil plan to take them out and kill them in the mountains and so wipe them off the earth?' Calm down your fierce anger. Change your mind about doing these terrible things to your own people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, whom you yourself promised, 'I'll make your descendants as many as the stars in the sky.' And I promised to give your descendants this whole land to possess for all time." Then the Lord changed his mind about the terrible things he said he would do to his people. May God bless the reading and hearing of his holy word.
If you were here last week, I shared with the children and with you the idea of reflecting on our lives and the value that brings to an objective assessment of where we've been, where we want to go, who we are, who we hope to be. As part of my ongoing self-reflection, I really try to be honest with myself relative to my strengths and my weaknesses. And for a very long time, I've come to the conclusion that I am not good at making quick decisions, especially in emergency situations. Now, if you're looking for someone to organize and plan and follow through a plan, I'm your girl. I will work night and day to make a plan come through. But if you're looking for someone who thinks quick on their feet, in a really tough situation, you might want to pass on me and go to the next person. Today, across our country, we remember the events of 15 years ago when really our country changed in a way we have never quite recovered from. The events of 9/11/2001 have changed how we feel about and who we define as other. Perhaps we still harbor anger at those who came on our shores and killed innocent people to make a political statement. We might find deep within us unresolved grief. I remember a friend, especially today, a friend I came to know during my time in San Jose while serving as a student minister in the summer of 2010. My friend Larry lost his husband, who was working in the Twin Towers. And actually, while I was in San Jose, there was a news organization doing a story on 10-year surviving spouses. And they came to the church one Sunday to record Larry ringing and playing his handbells. Larry has since died, but when Brenda and I went to the 9/11 memorial when we were in New York in April of this year, as we visited that museum, I wrote Larry and his husband a note on the memorial wall. And I didn't know it until this week, but our own Ron Johnson lost two of his best friends that day. Ron was supposed to be best man at their wedding. It's really a small world, isn't it? I mean, just think of it. At least two of us in our little church had good friends who were either killed or directly affected by these horrific acts. This weekend, and perhaps you saw some of them on your way to church or before you came, the airwaves are full of acknowledgments of the 15th anniversary. And I do hope many of you can join us this afternoon for Lexington's community service. As I shared with you, I'm incredibly honored to be a representative of the Christian faith during this interfaith service. I am drawn to interfaith work and worship, where folks who are Christian and Jewish and Muslim can come together across our tradition and ideologies. I'm sure one of the most moving parts of today's service will be our remembrance of the first responders, which will occur after we follow our chiefs of the fire department and police to the respective memorials where they will lay wreaths. You know, it's one thing to find yourself in a random setting where killers attack, whether that be in Twin Towers, church study groups, theaters, schools, nightclubs, or parades. Unfortunately, we know that list goes on and on, don't we, relative to the targets of murder? Such an unfair and unnecessary loss of life beyond circumstances that any of us can control. And yet it's another thing, is it not, to rush into those situations knowing the danger that lies ahead. That's what happened on 9/11. And that's what continues to happen over and over again as first responders come to the aid of death and destruction. Have you ever paid much attention to the name of those for whom we will recognize later today, and the name for those who run into danger? First, responders. That specific terminology calls my attention to the word responders. For that is responders, not reactors. Where would you define yourself if you had to choose one or the other? How might others define you? As a responder or a reactor? I know where I'd be. I know where I'd place myself, and I know where others who know me well would place me. I am a reactor. Emotional reactor. And if I'm not really careful, I will react to a situation instead of responding. And my friends, there is a difference. For reaction is based on emotion. It's that urge to already be preparing our response when we're talking to people in a heated argument instead of listening to their side of the story. It's that decision to leave the church because someone didn't like something someone else did. It's that unhealthy and perhaps vindictive action disguised as a justified response to someone who hurts us. The truth is, and I've sometimes learned this the hard way, reactions often make the situation worse. Reactions based on emotions without much thought can have devastating effects. Our scripture today is evidence of that reality. I touched on this scripture a few weeks ago, along with a similar story in Numbers, that if I'm not mistaken, Michael was liturgist that day as well, because I remember him reading that scripture. And I asked you all at the beginning of that sermon, I said, what do those two stories have in common? And I heard you respond, God changed God's mind. So this morning, as we reflect on living on the edge of indecision, I find this scripture really helpful. For had God reacted the way God wanted to, God would have abandoned God's people just like God did in the days of Noah. After God had promised, after the flood story, that God would never abandon God's people again, here in Exodus, God is tempted to do it again. God is frustrated. God is hurt. God's ticked off. After everything God has done, after the constant presence provided to the people as they escaped Egypt and were on the journey to the promised land, the people had gone astray. And I would say what we have in this scripture story is a clear case of overreaction. Indeed, of double reaction. The people in a time of anxiousness and uncertainty had reacted by beginning worshiping of other gods and doing things completely against God's will for their lives. The people got scared and hungry, and they felt vulnerable, out of control. So they reacted to the first comfortable, or what they believed to be the first sure thing to come down the sandy path. And when God saw their reaction, God was about to say, well, watch this move and react as well. Pause. Pause. Pause before play, friends. That's what we see happen here. Moses intercedes in the midst of God's reaction and says, okay, God, I get it. You're angry, and rightly so, but please reconsider. Think of where we've been. Think of what witness this will give to your love should you abandon us. Don't do it, God. Give the people another chance. They're reacting out of selfishness and vulnerability and oppression and depression. Yes, they're reacting inappropriately because they've lost the big picture. But God, please don't react back at them. And then we see it. God seems to come out of the pause, and after authentic discussion with Moses, God responds. Listen, there's still a consequence for the people's action. Their rebellion results in many of them, including Moses, never seeing the promised land. And yet, most importantly, I think to this story is to point out that because God paused instead of reacting, because God was willing to listen to Moses, because God gave grace and mercy and understanding, God and God's people remained in covenant. And I just bet there was some discussion with the people as well. Perhaps while Moses was speaking to God, Moses' partner Aaron was lecturing the people. Come on, people, get yourselves together and stop reacting in life-taking ways. Remember who you are. Remember whose you are. Remember who rescued us from Egypt. Remember the God who not only got us out of the hellhole, but the same God who's remained a constant presence in our difficult journey. Get a hold of yourselves and return to the God who made you, who loves you, the God who needs you. Whatever happened and whatever was said, this we know. The people too paused their reacting and instead responded. They responded by returning to God and remaining connected to God's ways and God's promise. It is a grueling world right now, isn't it? We have about 2 more months of a very heated election cycle. And believe it or not, in our church family, this church family where we love one another and accept one another, in our church family, we have people on both sides of the political aisle. Our world is challenging. Some folks looking for love, some looking for work, some trying to hold on to relationships, and some trying to meet the challenges of work. Some fighting addiction, some fighting family and friends and former lovers, and don't have reconciliation, and don't have peace, and don't have hope. In the midst of all these challenges and vulnerabilities, in the midst of anger and frustration and any manner of other emotions, it is easy, it seems to be an easy fix to react instead of pausing a bit. Just taking a deep breath and stepping back. Finding those to listen and listening to others. Finding trusted people who will give us advice which is absent of personal agendas. Finding folks who have experience and wisdom we desperately need to hear. It is easy, my friends, to rely on ourselves to chart our next course of reaction. But what takes discipline and, frankly, courage is to pause in the middle of chaos and anxiety and anger and listen and contemplate and, yes, even pray, and then respond. Sure, respond in a way sometimes that will have some consequences towards someone or a situation that's hurt us. The response might be to walk away from a relationship that is unhealthy, but perhaps not in doing so calling each other names on the way out the door. The response may be to find another church, but perhaps not attacking someone else's faith as we leave. The response may be, as I will find myself on Tuesday, to stand on the Capitol grounds of our state, calling for justice and a more compassionate government, but without personal insults to the leaders. We're called to respond instead of react. And it is an important distinction, especially in these days we are living in. So what are some situations in your life this morning that are calling for God-led responses? On the seesaw of indecision, how might this lesson lead you to pause, then play, pause, then respond in a way that will lead to forgiveness and reconciliation, in a way that will lead to hope? I am so thankful for the 9/11 first responders. Folks who acted quickly, yet did so after much training for those particular events. Thus, when tragedy occurs, when natural disasters strike, when guns are irresponsibly used in the hands of those who hate, our first responders across our country are ready to step in and respond. And I'm so thankful that Moses mediated God's planned reaction. What guts that took. To go to our Creator and say, time out. Don't react, God. Give the people another chance. For not only did God choose to respond versus react with the ancient community and give them another chance, the truth is, God responds over and over again in my life and in yours and in theirs by pausing and allowing us to find our way back home to God's abiding presence and amazing love. It's our choice whether we react or respond. It is my hope and it's my prayer that we might pause before playing, so that we too become God's first responders in the world. Indeed, in our own life.